AgTech 360 discusses breakthrough technologies that are impacting growers, businesses, and consumers. Hear from industry and academic experts about what's on the horizon.
Welcome to AgTech 360. Today I'm joined by Dr. Grieger to discuss a small-scale technology with broad and far-reaching impacts. Dr. Grieger has extensive experience studying the effects of nanotechnology, and she's here to share her research and her thoughts with us, which is great. We're going to explore her work, the potential benefits of nanotechnology in agriculture, and the challenges involved in assessing its risks. Thank you for joining me, Khara.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, I'm excited to have you too. So let's start off with some basics first. Tell us, when we hear the term nanotechnology, tell us a little bit about what it is and why is it different in terms of other technologies in terms of scale?
So the field of nanotechnology generally refers to our ability to manufacture, develop, manipulate materials that are on the nanoscale, which are roughly defined as between 0 and 100 nanometers. And actually at that very, very small scale, we're talking at the atomic scale. Materials can actually behave very differently than at the bulk scale. So at that really small scale, you start to see very different behavioral and physical and chemical properties at the nanometer that you wouldn't normally see at the bulk scale. And so that has led to a lot of really fascinating discoveries in materials science that has resulted in a lot of different applications today. So yeah, you've raised the question about how is it different from other technologies. Well, in some ways it's similar to other what they call key enabling technologies because it represents a range of different technologies that can be applied in a number of different applications that can actually build on each other, and it has the ability to really transform many sectors of our society. They tend to be very knowledge intensive and also very interdisciplinary in nature. So other types of key enabling technologies include biotechnology, the field of advanced materials, which is also coming out of nanotechnology, as well as now AI.
Great. Gotcha. So let's talk about nanotechnology in agriculture. How are we seeing it applied in agriculture, or maybe looking a little bit forward, how do you think it might be applied in agriculture, and how might it be used to enhance farming practices?
Most of the applications right now that I see are in late research and development phases or early commercialization phases.
So it's not something that's widespread at this point, but we could envisage that it might be in a few years.
Correct, yes. And the reason why nanotechnology could produce more sustainable agricultural systems are that we could harness some of the unique properties that I mentioned before about nanoscale materials and use them to improve our agricultural practices. And there's a number of different applications where nanotechnology are used, many of which rely on the use of engineered nanoparticles. So we have seen a number of different studies, many of which, as I mentioned before, are in late R&D phases where they are developing, researchers and innovators are developing nanoscale pesticides, nanoscale fertilizers to create more effective and targeted ways to deliver agrochemicals to plants. And that could be really advantageous because then you could have the delivery of fertilizers or pesticides or whatever, and it could get to the crop more effectively and without runoff into the environment that could also cause impacts to non-target organisms in some cases. And so this would be just a more effective way to deliver what we want to deliver to the crop without having some of those side effects. Another set of applications of nanotechnology include nanosensors to have the ability to sense pathogens, even in food as well, like nanosensors used in food packaging, but back to agriculture, you could use different sensors to detect pathogens in the environment or different aspects or different elements that you would want to detect in the environment. We've actually looked at different sensors for phosphorus, for example. Could this be at the nanoscale? So nanosensors are another application. In addition, we're seeing nanoscale vaccines for livestock or animal production. So actually we have a case study that we're investigating that looks at nanoscale vaccines for combating avian influenza. So there is really a need to develop more effective vaccines for avian influenza, and so maybe by harnessing some of the properties of nanoscale materials that would encapsulate an antigen, that could be a more effective delivery mechanism. So those are just some examples of its use in agriculture that hopefully could make it more sustainable.
Wow, that is such a broad range. And as you said at the start, like this is an enabling technology, so maybe shouldn't be surprised by that, but I anticipated you would talk about things like fertilizer or crop protection, but the idea of a biosensor at the nanoscale or helping to fight diseases, and I guess you could transform that from animals ultimately back into plants as well, potentially, just shows that it's a very interesting, maybe exciting technology to think about.
And I'll just say, in addition, I mentioned food a little bit, but there are a number of different applications directly in food. So nanoscale additives or even nanoscale coatings on fresh fruit and vegetables that could potentially extend the shelf life. So then the idea would be that you have less food waste by having a nanocellulose coating on an apple or a banana or whatever. So that's another set of examples.
Which I guess also kind of brings to mind other features around safety of these types of technologies and maybe public perception, but I think we'll get into that maybe in a second. But let's talk about you. You're coming from the Department of Applied Ecology here at NC State. You're part of PSI, but tell me how you got into agriculture. What is your background?
Thanks for asking. So I actually have a PhD in environmental engineering, first of all, and so I have studied a lot of different processes to assess risks of nanotechnology and engineered nanomaterials, stemming from all the way back from when I was a PhD student and a postdoc, and at the Technical University of Denmark, where I lived for a number of years. But so I've done most of my research on understanding risks and making decisions around those risks of nanotechnology and nanomaterials. I actually fell in love with food and agriculture a long time ago as a kid because and this is something that most people here don't know about me, is that both my parents grew up on a farm. Okay. And so I spent all of my summers running around the farms of my grandparents.
Where was the farm?
This was in Indiana. So I have really fond memories of running around, chomping around, my grandparents' farms when I was growing up. And then fast forward, I'm, a postdoc working on nanotechnology and risks and decisions. And then right after that, I moved back to the U.S. to work at RTI International as a research scientist. And there I was thrown into some projects around food safety, funded by the FDA, and so my job was to lead up some projects related to risk and decisions in the food supply. And so then I married the two topics I was working on. I still wanted to keep my research on nanotechnology, but now I wanted to incorporate it into a new set of projects that I was involved in. So then I got more heavily involved into looking at risks of nanomaterials in food and agriculture, and that was probably about 10 years ago when I started really having funding around nanotechnology in food and agriculture products. And I won my first USDA NIFA grant in 2019 that was specifically around looking at risks and responsible innovation of nanotechnology in food and agriculture. And so that grant that really opened up a lot of more doors to further investigate these topics that I really enjoy learning about.
Well, that's great. So tell me a little bit, about what your research interests are now. What kind of projects are you on? And what is your role in those projects?
Sure. Following that USDA NIFA grant that we won in 2019, then I was fortunate to be awarded a follow-up USDA NIFA grant where I serve as project director again. And this project specifically focuses on nanotechnology as well as genetic engineering in food and agriculture and exploring risks and benefits, because every new technology or application of technology has its benefits and risks. And there are different types of benefits and risks, right? There could be benefits and risks to human health, to the environment, to animal health, ethical, social, legal risks, right? And so how do you balance all of those different types of risk and benefits across these products? So that's what we're looking at in our current USDA NIFA grant. And we're also looking at different stakeholder perceptions of these products that rely on nanotechnology and genetic engineering in food and agriculture, and understanding different perceptions of their sustainability. Because, the famous saying is that beauty is in the eye of the beholder, but I feel like sustainability can also be in the eye of the beholder, depending on the types of criteria that you're using, or how important certain criteria are. How do you balance that set of different benefits and risks? So anyway, that's what we're looking at in our current USDA grant.
The North Carolina Plant Sciences Initiative impacts lives through innovative applications and discoveries. By leveraging cutting-edge research and technology, we address global challenges related to agriculture, sustainability, and human health.
And talking about beauty being in the eye of the beholder, talk to me about what your understanding is of public perception of nanotechnology. Maybe it's not as high as some areas of technology like biotech perhaps, but where are the public on these types of technology?
You're spot on. This is a great question, and you're right. Like that, when studies have investigated public perceptions of nanotechnology, generally the public is relatively unsure. Around half of the people polled have not heard anything about nanotechnology, and so they're generally unsure, or like those that have heard something, they're generally not sure if they are accepting it or not accepting it. But what we do know in the literature, and also in our own work looking at perceptions of nanotechnology in food and ag, is that application really matters. So their acceptance level of nanotechnology in one product may be very different than its application in another product. And so what we found in our work that aligns with what the broader research shows is that people are more willing to accept nanotechnology in agriculture than directly within food that they directly consume. So that direct contact is important in terms of perceptions. Another key aspect that we identified in our research that I think is really interesting is that in addition to looking at risk and benefits as driving perceptions, the second most leading cause of driving perceptions and acceptance of nanotechnology in food and ag was whether it was really needed. Was nanotechnology really needed in this product? Because if it wasn't really needed, they weren't willing to accept the risks. So we got a lot of stakeholder responses that in a case where nanoscale titanium dioxide was used in a food product just to make it whiter, that's not acceptable, because they don't think that the color, it doesn't really have any functional property. Like having the color make it, or being whiter, is not really important, so therefore I don't want to accept it. But in another product that was actually responding to a greater societal need, like, for example, combating the citrus greening disease in Florida, there's a societal need for that. So the people were willing to accept those risks and therefore accept the technology more.
No, it makes a lot of sense, I would say.
Yeah, exactly.
So in terms of assessing the risk, as you explained earlier, these nanoparticles, nanotechnology, there is different behaviors perhaps from the same molecules at a different scale. So where are we in terms of the science of really understanding the risk of these technologies?
We've spent around 2 decades now trying to understand the different environmental health and safety risks of different nanomaterials and different products and in different exposure scenarios. And we definitely have made great strides in understanding the risk profiles of a number of different nanomaterials, but there's just so much more that we don't really know. There's a lot of uncertainty regarding risks within different matrices. Even food is actually quite a complex matrix when you think about it, and a lot can happen when you ingest something, because there are reactions that happen in your mouth, there are reactions that happen in your gut, and so the nanoparticle and its ultimate risk profile changes actually throughout. It can change throughout your digestion, tract. And so understanding that full range of toxicological profiles is just very complex, and we're not there in terms of really understanding our full risks yet. At the same time, we have been using nanomaterials in different products for a couple of decades now, and we don't know of any major health, yeah, exactly. So that is also good. It's just maybe the science is just still really uncertain in terms of our full knowledge of the risks of many of these materials, but it could be something that we still need to work on.
Well, let's look forward then. I mean, now get out your crystal ball and think about, how are these technology or this nanotechnology, nanoparticles going to be integrated, do you feel, in agriculture or maybe even food as well in the next 5 to 10 years? Is it going to become, really commonplace, do you feel, once, we've caught up in terms of really understanding the profile of these different materials, both in terms of risk and benefit?
I really do think there could be a lot of potential benefits, or it'd be really interesting to see how sustainable nano pesticides and nano fertilizers really could be if we can do more research so we can really make sure they work properly, in the field to have a more effective agrochemical delivery mechanism. I mean, I do think that could be really interesting. I would like to see more studies on the cost of scaling up some of these technologies, because as we all know, things can work very differently in the lab or in the field, like in an experimental field compared to in real life, at scale. So I'd like to see more studies about cost and scale up. And so anyways, in addition to nanoscale fertilizers and pesticides, I think the nano vaccine applications could also be another interesting field to pay attention to, because we were pretty successful in using nanotechnology in our recent COVID vaccines, actually. We used nanoparticles for encapsulating our viral antigens. And so I think that same type of mechanism could be used to help combat different issues that we're seeing in animal agriculture. So I would say that could also be another really interesting field to pay attention to as well. And maybe the use of nanosensors. I'm not as familiar with that field as with nanoparticles, but if we could develop some cost-effective sensors to be able to detect pathogens or extra nutrients in the environment, I mean, that would also be really nice. So I think those are some fields to pay attention to going forward.
Khara, thank you so much.
AgTech 360 shares relevant news and breakthroughs with audiences across the globe. Stay connected and join the conversation by following NCPSI on social media.